Hello, I'm Morris Barron, an attorney in the Ethics Law and Policy Branch at the U.S. Office of Government Ethics. And in this presentation, I'll discuss what is required once you have decided to submit a CD request to OGE. With that said, let's get started. Next slide. Okay, we'll begin with the employee. The employee must submit a written request to the Designated Agency Ethics Official, or DAO, which must contain the following. First, it must contain a full and specific description of the property that will be divested. For example, if the property is corporate stock, the request must include the number of shares, the name of the corporate entity, and it's also fine and often a good idea to include the ticker symbol if it's publicly traded stock. Second, the employee's request to the DAO must include a brief description of how the eligible person acquired the property. For example, was it purchased from a broker? Was the property inherited? Et cetera. What are the means in which the employer acquired the property? The employee's request must also include a statement that the eligible person holding the property has agreed to divest the property. And finally, the employee's request must contain either the date that the requirement to divest first applied or the date the employee first agreed that the eligible person would divest the property in order to comply with conflict of interest requirements. Within those the items that the employee must include, I mentioned the eligible person. So I'm just going to briefly touch on, who is an eligible person. An eligible person can be the employee. It can also be the employee's spouse or any minor or dependent child of the employee. And lastly, an eligible person may be any trustee holding property in a trust in which the employee, the spouse, or any minor or dependent child has a beneficial interest in the principal or income of the trust. So just wanted to have that defined for you, or let you know what that eligible person meant, because that's very important. At OGE, we see employee requests in the form of, sometimes it's an email from the employee to the DAO, or sometimes it's in the form of maybe a memo to the DAO. Either one of those is fine with us, but just wanted to share a couple methods in which we see those employee requests when we see them here at OGE. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to talk about what the DAO must submit. The DAO must send to OGE's director, and that submission can be made to the email address you see on the slide here, cd@oge.gov. The DAO will submit to OGE the employee's written request, which we just discussed in the prior slide. So that must be included in the DAO submission. Next, the DAO must submit a copy of the employee's most recent incumbent financial disclosure report or new onset report if the incumbent report has not been filed. And that submission should also include any subsequent periodic transaction reports. Please note, if the employee is not required to file a financial disclosure report, the DAO must obtain from the employee a listing of the employee's interests that would be required to be disclosed in a confidential financial disclosure report, excluding gifts and travel reimbursements. And for purposes of such a report, the reporting period is the preceding 12 months from the date the requirement to divest first applied, or the date the employee first agreed that the eligible person would divest the property. All right, the next item the DAO must include in the submission is a statement describing why the divestiture of the property is reasonably necessary to comply with 18 USC 208 or any other federal conflict of interest statute, regulation, rule, or executive order. The next item is to include it, if applicable, A statement identifying any factors that, in the opinion of the DAO, weigh against the issuance of a certificate of divestiture. For example, the employee may be retiring soon, or otherwise just leaving the agency shortly, and something like that would weigh against issuing the CD, because if the employee is gonna receive the benefit of this CD, it's going to be necessary that the agency receives the benefit of the employee's services. And then finally, the DAO should include a brief description of the employee's position or a citation to a statute that sets forth the duties of the position. Next slide. All right. As you may know, Program Advisory 19-10 contains a form that makes it easy for agencies to be sure that they're submitting all the information that is required. Though the form is not required to be used, I found that the vast majority of agencies and the vast majority of CD requests that we receive include that form, and that agencies, find it helpful as a way of checking, again, to make sure that what is required to be submitted to OGE is included in the agency submission. Also, in order to expedite processing a CD request, if more than 6 holdings are being divested, for example, if an employee has 20 stocks, we ask that the agency provide the information regarding those holdings in an Excel spreadsheet or Word document. This helps with the processing of the actual CD document that will be issued. Next slide. Lastly, if the property is held in a trust, the employee must submit a copy of the trust instrument, as well as a list of the trust's current holdings, unless those holdings are already listed on the employee's most recent financial disclosure report. Next slide. All right. Thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful. And again, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact your desk officer. And I also left my information on this last slide here, so you can feel free to contact me about anything pertaining to this presentation or the CD program. Thanks again for listening.